Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see fourth part, what if Deku became Spider-Man after a science experiment. Here is short summary. A single encounter can change the course of history. When Izuku Midoriya tried and failed to pass the UA practical exam, his despair knew no boundaries. However, when he comes across a child in need, his fate would be forever changed, as the encounter leads him to become the science experiment of a deranged doctor, and grants him the abilities to become a hero. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Class 1A dorms. When the day's training came to an end, Kendo proposed that the two classes get to know each other better through a movie night at the 1A dormitory. Izuku, as the class representative, was alright with the idea, as were Momo and Shota. The only one that had a problem with the idea was Monoma, but a quick chop to the back of his neck from Kendo shut him up quickly. The blonde troublemaker was then dragged off to his own dorm room and put to bed while the rest of the classes got ready for their evening together. Which meant arguing over what movie to watch while the two class reps and vice reps chipped in for several pizzas. As long as we don't watch some sappy-ass romance movie, I don't give a damn, Bakugo said as he slumped on the couch, tired from the day of training and also more than a little embarrassed about how his quirkless combat session had ended. His eyes drifted toward one Pony Tsunatori as she talked animatedly with Ochako, who seemed to understand a little bit of what she said whenever the girl slipped back into English. I can't believe she got me so damned easily, the blonde bomber thought angrily. I'd rather have gotten another black eye from round face. Ochako's face had been a mask of pure laughter when he'd gone flying out of the ring. He knew that he should have been mad at her, but the sight of her laughing face had brought that annoying flutter back to his stomach. Nothing scary, please, Kyoka said as she placed Eri in her lap. I don't want Eri to have nightmares. Of course, Eri now had a habit of surprising people. She looked up at her mother. Grandpa let me watch Alien, she said with a small smile on her face. Kyoka looked down at her in surprise before she turned to her boyfriend. We are never letting your dad babysit again, she stated with a flat look. It should be noted that when she had watched that very movie for the first time, as old as it was, it had scared the life out of her for an entire week. Izuku chuckled as he vaulted over the back of the couch and landed in the seat next to them. It could be worse. The boy wrapped his arm around her shoulders as she cuddled into his side. Think about this, he said. My mom owns the 50 Shades of Grey series. Kendo leaned over the back of the couch. The books or the movies? Both, Izuku muttered, and I made the mistake of sitting through one of them out of curiosity. His face turned a deep shade of red. Now that's traumatizing, he said while Kyoka nodded in agreement. She had managed to read the first book in the series. Setsuna was snickering. Well, at least you and Kyoka will. She ducked as one of Kyoka's jacks sped toward her head. Okay. Nope. The blushing punk rocker snapped while Eri giggled at her parents' faces. That is not happening. Setsuna was laughing her head off. Not literally this time, and it was only made worse when Mina and Toru got in on the act. Aw, come on. Mina giggled at the pair. You can't tell me you haven't imagined getting all webbed up. Izuku buried his face in his hands. I'd never. Oh, you know you would, Toru giggled while Kyoka did her best to hide in Izuku's shoulder. Abara and Iida were frowning at the two girls. That is highly inappropriate to talk about in front of a child, you two, the blue-haired speedster admonished. Agreed, Abara nodded in agreement, and you shouldn't try to corrupt such a wholesome relationship such as theirs, she admonished the pair. Izuku groaned. We're wholesome, he muttered to his girlfriend. Am I doing something wrong in this relationship? Kyoka snorted. Nope, not a thing. She stretched up and keyed his cheek, making the other girls squeal. So are we picking a movie, or what? Shinso asked from where he and Suyu sat. I'm okay with anything so long as it's good. Suyu nodded. Me, too. How about Pirates of the Caribbean? Tetsu suggested. Yui looked at him. I like those movies. Great. Kendo nodded as she picked out the movies. By the way, are we doing frozen pizzas, or are we ordering something? The doors to the front of the dorm house came open, and in walked Toshinori Yagi with Hisashi Midoriya right behind him. Both of them were carrying several boxes of food. "Did someone say pizza?" the skeletal blonde said boisterously. "I've got every flavor of chicken wings," the former mercenary grinned, including the extra spicy kind. The combined classes cheered as Kendo and Momo stepped forward to relieve them of the boxes. "And don't worry about classes tomorrow," Toshinori said. "I convinced Nezu to let you kids off for a day considering how hard everyone trained today. Except," Hisashi cut in as he leveled off a look toward Kaminari, "for you." He smirked while the blonde boy groaned. "Oh, don't look so worried, kid, we're just going to have another go at your quirk," he said, which made the boy frown deeply. "That didn't work out so well last time I tried," the boy said with a sigh. He then cast a small glance toward Izuku and Kyoka, both of whom were too engrossed in each other and the little girl in her lap to notice much else. That one glance told Hisashi all he needed to know. "You'll do fine," the former mercenary said with a firmer tone. "I think I know how to help you now." Toshinori chuckled at the man while grabbing a slice of pizza for himself. "Speaking of help, young Midoriya, I've heard a bit of good news for you and your little family," he said, gaining their attention almost instantly. "Sir Night Eye has told me that the group looking for Eri has left the country." "Seriously?" Kyoka beamed at the man. "That means we're—" Hisashi cut in. "Not quite as free as we'd like," the man sighed. "While the main figures of this Yakuza group have fled the country," he said with a tired shake of his head, "that doesn't mean that they don't have people still in the area keeping an eye out for an opening to make a grab for Eri." He made a small gesture toward the little girl. "But chances are that they'll be small fries compared to the ones that Shisaki took with him." Izuku looked at his father with confusion. "So does this mean we can leave the campus, or are we still stuck here?" he asked, hoping it was the former and not the latter. "Even I'm starting to go stir crazy, and I'm a hero nerd," Katsuki belted out laughingly while claiming a box of extra spicy wings for himself. Ochako plopped down next to him unexpectedly and stole one for herself. "Hey, I wouldn't do that if I were you," the ashen blonde warned her. "I've got a tolerance for this." Ochako just giggled. "Oh, please, if you can handle it." She made a show of taking a huge bite and chewing slowly. "Then so can I." Her face started turning beet red. "Wah." She yelped and started fanning her mouth. "Ha. Hot. Too hot. I told you," Katsuki yelled before leaping up from the couch and making for the kitchen. He grabbed the milk out of the refrigerator and handed her the whole carton. "This'll help." She took it and started chugging it down. The two classes were chuckling at the girl while Hisashi shook his head before turning his attention back to his son. "I know you guys are wanting to go out and show Eri the world she's been kept from." He reached over and patted the little girl's head, making her giggle. "And I know you two want some alone time for dates and all that. But until we actually catch this guy, you'll need escorts wherever you go." Kyoka shared a look with her boyfriend, who shrugged. "I'll take what we can get at this point," he sighed. "Besides, it'd be nice to not have to worry about Iida walking in on us again." "Or our parents," Kyoka muttered, both of them shivering when they remembered the incident that her mother had walked in on. Iida was giving the pair of them a frown. "When did I ever walk in on you two?" he asked while both teens blushed furiously and the collective of 1A girls started laughing. "That's a pretty good question," Hisashi said as he crossed his arms. "Son, do we need to have a little talk about safe say?" Izuku suddenly jumped up. "Wokay, no," he yelled, much to the amusement of the others. "I definitely don't need to hear that." "I'd still like an answer to my question," Iida remarked, now thinking hard in an attempt to remember. "I'm quite certain that—" "Wait a minute," he shouted and thrust an accusatory finger toward Shinso. "You used your quirk on me, didn't you?" Shinso just grinned. "No idea what you're talking about," he said while Suyu gave one of her cute laughing croaks. "Don't try to play innocent with me, Shinso," the speedster shouted while the girls continued cracking up. "Give me back my memories, and I mean right now." Shinso acted like he was thinking about it for a moment. "You sure about that, Iida?" he asked with a teasing grin toward the couple, who were making negative gestures at him. "From what the gossip girls were saying, you walked in on something really hot and steamy." "Shinso." Both Izuku and Kyoka shouted in outrage while the rest of the classes joined in on the laughter. Hisashi hiding a laugh behind his fist while Toshinori was doubled over. Hot and steamy, Eri looked up at her parents innocently, like meat buns. She asked, completely oblivious. Hisashi couldn't hold it in after that and burst out laughing. The only one that wasn't laughing at the couple, he noticed, was Kaminari. After the students had started their movie night together, Toshinori took his leave of the dorm, his heart feeling lighter than it had in many years. I truly do love those children, he smiled as a rumble of thunder echoed overhead. Toshinori hummed in thought as he looked up at the sky, the stars and moon becoming hidden by thick dark clouds as the wind began to pick up. Strange. I thought tonight was supposed to be clear. He wondered as he made his way toward the teachers' dorms. I am afraid that it is my doing, said a voice from behind him. Startled, Toshinori wheeled around on his heel, ready to transform, but all he found standing behind him was a man in a dark suit, sporting a storm gray beard and a patch covering his left eye. He raised his right hand. Peace, my friend, for I mean you no harm. He said as more thunder rumbled overhead, I merely wish to speak with you. Toshinori did not relax his stance. I don't know you, he said to the stranger, and given the happenings of the past week, I'm not very fond of unauthorized people coming onto school grounds. He gave a sad smile and a short nod. I understand, the stranger said, and I assure you that no harm will come to anyone upon these grounds while I am present. He went on, truly, I only came to talk with the man that has given such incredible hope to the world for so many years. Toshinori's eyes began to widen. Whoever this man was, he knew that he was All Might. The blonde began to bulk himself up. And how is it that you know who I am? He demanded as he retook his muscle form. I have kept my weakened state a tightly guarded secret from all but those I would trust with my life. The stranger nodded. I know many things, friend, he said. I know that you are weakening with each battle you enter, he said as All Might flinched, and I know that you are looking for a successor to this power you wield. All Might could stand it no longer and dashed forward, his massive hand wrapping around the man's neck. He didn't seem to mind it, however, and continued speaking. I also know that the one who injured you so grievously is still among the living. This caused the man's eyes to widen with fear and anger all at once. No, that can't be true. All Might ground out. I smashed his head in with my bare hands. There's no possible way for him to be alive, he shouted angrily, his hand tightening around the stranger's neck. All things are possible, the stranger said cryptically. Your foe still lives, and it is he that is behind the creatures that attacked this school. All Might growled before he grudgingly lowered him to the ground. How do you know all of this? He asked as a sudden feeling of dread washed over him. When he looked at this man, he felt as though he was staring down someone more powerful than he was during his prime, and even more so than his old foe, All for One. Who are you? I have many names, the stranger smiled. However, I'm fond of the name Donald Blake, if you must know. He extended a hand in greeting. And you are Toshinori Yagi, better known to your world as All Might, the Pillar of Peace. All Might began to shrink down, and reached out to shake Donald's hand. I am glad that I could finally speak with you. Toshinori shook his head. I still don't understand, he muttered. How do you know me? How do you know everything? Donald reached up and tapped his eye patch. This I may no longer see, but that does not mean that it does not possess sight, he said. I have seen much in my time, and I have done many things that would seem impossible. He smiled at the man. However, I feel that what lies ahead for you may truly be impossible. Toshinori frowned. If All for One is still alive, then maybe, he muttered. I was just barely able to defeat him when I was still in my prime, but now he gestured to himself. If you claim the power of foresight, then please, tell me what I must do. He bowed his head. It will be difficult for you to accomplish, Donald said. You have lost a great many things in your life, Toshinori Yagi, but there is still one thing that you must lose. Toshinori sighed. One for all. He muttered. I need to pass on to the next holder. But Donald shook his head. These two powers, All for One and One for All, are powers that never should have existed, he said. Bound by a fate ruled by greed and hatred, these two powers will only continue to wage an unending war with each other, no matter how many times they change hands. He continued, you will be able to beat him again, Toshinori Yagi, but first you must be willing to let go of that which you wish to continue. Let go of. Toshinori's breath caught in his throat. You mean I should destroy one for all? He shook his head. But the world still needs. Donald gave a slow nod. You do not wish to leave the world without the hope that you and those that came before you inspired. He said with a small smile coming to his lips, you need not fear. Toshinori frowned. When the time is right, you will make the choice to let the power leave you. Then, and only then, will you be able to defeat your ancient foe. Toshinori didn't understand, but without my power, how? He was suddenly blinded by a flash of lightning, forcing him to shield his eyes. When he opened them again, it was to find the man, Donald Blake, gone. All that remained was a black spot on the ground where the lightning had struck. Class 1A dorms. As the thunder rolled outside the dorms, the students were largely unaware of what had transpired between their teacher and the stranger. Instead, they enjoyed their evening and their time together outside of their training. By the time the second movie was over, however, it was discovered that Eri had long since fallen asleep sprawled out on her parents' laps. Izuku decided that it was time to put her to bed, but was reluctant to take her outside with a storm overhead. Momo smiled at his concern and told him that there was a room already prepared for her right between the rooms that Kyoka occupied and the room that was meant for himself. I didn't know that I had a room ready for me here, Izuku remarked quietly to his girlfriend as they crept upstairs to put the little girl to bed. How come you didn't tell me before? Kyoka just shrugged. It never came up, she said, smiling a little. Besides, you liked spending time with our families so much that I didn't think you wanted to move out of the safe house. Izuku chuckled. I wouldn't mind it. He relented with a look down at her. If it meant I got to spend more time with you, then I'd move in tonight. Her cheeks grew rosy at the pleasant thought. We wouldn't have to worry about our parents. Just Iida barging in on us just to make sure we keep it PG rated. She giggled softly as they moved toward the little girl's designated room. The boy thought for a moment, then smiled. I could shove something in front of the door. Izuku offered, only half joking when they reached Eri's room. Kyoka stepped ahead of him. That would only keep the other girls from spying on us, she said as she opened the door for him. Mina and Toru would probably be all over us just to get some pointers for themselves. The door swung open, revealing a nicely decorated little girl's room, courtesy of Momo's quirk. Wow, they really went all out with everything, she said as she turned on the lights and spotted something on the bed. Oh, you've gotta be kidding. She nearly squealed with laughter as she skipped over to the bed and picked something up. Izuku smiled at her. What is it? He asked, wondering what had her so excited. Kyoka turned around and showed him a plush doll, but not just any plush. It was a Spider-Man doll that mirrored Izuku's first costume all the way down to the neon green eyes. The boy held a huge smile on his face as he laughed quietly. I'm gonna have to thank her for this. She clutched the doll to her chest, grinning just widely. I'm gonna ask her to make one for me, Kyoka giggled, her jacks floating happily around her cheeks. Izuku gave her a questioning look even though the smile remained on his face as she moved to turn down the bedding. I know it's weird, but I really want one. Izuku just shook his head as he laid Eri down on the bed, Kyoka putting the Spider-Man doll in her arms for her to cuddle, and pulled the covers over her. Good night, sweetie, he said before keying her head softly, little mumbles coming from her as she held the doll close. Kyoka moved in for her turn as Izuku went to turn the light out. He waited at the door while Kyoka turned the little girl's nightlight on. When she left the room and closed the door, he then reached out to wrap his arms around her waist. Why would you want a doll when you already have the real thing? Kyoka's giggles came unbridled then. Izuku Midoriya, she smiled up at him with her arms looping around his neck, jealous of a doll. She said teasingly while Izuku's eyes sparked with electricity. Now she knew she was playing with fire. And she didn't want to stop. She pulled his head down so that their lips were just inches apart. You know, you don't have to be jealous, she said, her words echoing what he had once said to her as his breath tickled her lips, because there's no one else in the world I'd want holding me right now. She tilted her head up just a little so that their lips were just barely touching, just you. As the thunder rumbled outside the dorm, Izuku lowered his mouth the rest of the way to hers. He almost beeped at how impossibly soft her lips were as he breathed in the warm cinnamon scent of her perfume. She pressed her body against him firmly, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her own. She beeped his upper lip into her mouth and stroked it with her tongue, prompting a rumbling growl from his chest that made her tremble. She broke away for a moment, gasping for breath. "We should," she panted out as he slowly keyed his way across her cheek and down to her neck, causing a beat to rise from her throat as he trailed his lips across her skin. My room." She gasped out, "Let's go to my room." Izuku raised his head, making her gasp as she saw the look in his eyes. It was like she was looking into the eyes of a hungry predator on the hunt, and it made her weak in the knees. He must have sensed it, because he knelt down and swept her up into his arms. She squealed softly as he carried her the short distance to her room, giggling the entire time. She reached out and opened the door for him, allowing him inside before he quickly kicked the door shut. "Careful," she chided giddily, "you'll wake Eri up." She kicked her legs as he carried her over to the bed, kneeling down on the mattress and laying her down in one motion. "Wait," she mumbled as he leaned toward her again. "The lights are off," she realized. "How can you see?" Izuku laughed. "It's one of my quirk's abilities," he explained. "Spiders are largely nocturnal predators, so I can see pretty good in the dark." She giggled and used her jacks to wrap around his neck so she could pull him toward her. "Just like how I use my quirk to find my way around," she said before their lips met again. He beeped her bottom lip into his mouth and caressed it with his tongue. That elicited a beep deep in her throat. He swept his tongue across the seam of her lips. When they opened, he molded his mouth against hers, and she keyed him back. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him close. With a growl, he enveloped her in his arms. Her answering whimper sounded like a sweet surrender. He swirled his tongue inside her mouth and she stroked it with her own. She tasted both tart and sweet as he moved his hands down her back, his fingers tickling and teasing her ribs where he knew she was the most sensitive. She squealed and giggled into his mouth and clutched at his shoulders. She used her right leg to hook around his back, and press him down onto her so she could feel his erection straining against his pants. She gasped and broke their key asterisk. I know you wanted to take things slow, but," she mumbled before it turned into a yelp as his rough hand reached down and grabbed her butt. "To hell with taking things slow," he growled huskily before attacking her neck again. She was wearing a t-shirt, which was now getting in his way, so she let go of him for a moment to shimmy out of it. His breath caught as tossed the shirt away, laying bare beeped beneath him. Embarrassment momentarily replaced everything else she was feeling as he continued to stare at her small beeps. Though instead of trying to hide that embarrassment, she reached for his own shirt and started lifting it off of him. He aided her when it reached his shoulders, yanking it off quickly so his view wouldn't be obstructed for long. Lightning flashed outside the window, illuminating the room for a brief moment, and again her eyes were drawn to his scars. More accurately, his most recent one. She reached up and traced the scar lightly with her fingers from his left shoulder down to his ribs. "Izuku," she looked up at him as tears began to well up in her eyes. "Promise me that this is the last one," she said, speaking of the many scars that covered his body. He reached up and took her hand in his, bringing it up to key the palm. "I can't do that." He sighed against her skin. "You know that I can't." "I know," she nodded slowly. "I just want to hear you say it." She mumbled, "Even if you can't keep that promise." He smiled at her, leaning his head down against hers. "I promise," he said quietly, "no more scars." She giggled as she cupped his face between her hands. "You're a horrible liar." She smiled tearfully. "I know," he whispered against her temple. He drew the base of her earlobe into his mouth and beepled. She bit her lips as the sensation sent shivers running up and down her spine. He then moved lower and tickled the side of her neck with his tongue. She beeped. He ran his hand down her hip to her thigh and squeezed. Kyoka pressed her hands against his chest, pushing him off of her and onto his side. He looked worried for a moment, scared that he might have done something wrong, until she started fumbling with the button on his jeans. His heart was hammering into his chest almost painfully as she drew the zipper down. She hooked her fingers around the waistband of his boxers as she pulled them down along with his jeans, freeing his erection. He noticed her eyes widened a little. Wow." Izuku floundered for a moment. "Sorry," he muttered as he sat up. I'm not sure if it's the right size, or. Hyoka giggled almost hysterically. Are you kidding? She asked. I'm just as new to this as you are. She reminded him, and what the hell am I supposed to compare it to? Izuku chuckled. Good point, he muttered. Hyoka scooted over to the edge of the bed and stood up. If I'm being honest, she said, crossing her arms over her chest, I'm not a fan of nudity, so this is a lot. She then pulled down her shorts. Izuku blushed as she turned back toward him. You don't seem to mind it now. She crawled back onto the bed, moving as close to him as she could. With anyone else, I don't think I could do this, she said, but I trust you. He snorted as he wrapped his arms around her. Hey, I'm being serious here, Green Bean, she pouted. I mean, any other guy would be all over me right now, but you're. She reached up and touched his cheek. You're exactly who I want. Izuku smiled and leaned his head against hers. Thank God for that. He positioned himself above her. Still, are you sure you're ready for this? Hyoka giggled. A little late to be asking that, isn't it? She laughed as she spread her legs open so he could settle between them. He shook his head. No, I'm being serious, he said. I don't want to ruin this for you. She smiled up at him and drew him down for a chaste key asterisk. You can't ruin this for me, she whispered against his lips. I want you. Right here, right now. She rubbed his cheeks with her thumbs, so no more worrying, all right. That crooked smile of his that she loved so much came to his lips, all right. Hyoka then yelped. Oh, wait a minute. She reached over toward her nightstand and fumbled around for something. Do you mind if we use this? She held up a square packet in front of him. We don't want any surprises, right? They're not coming back down, Kaminari thought gloomily as the movies continued on while he watched the stairs for any sign of Jiro. He then cast a glance around the room at the others. Shinso and Asui were still sitting together happily, the frog-like girl actually dozing off on the brainwasher's chest. And to make matters worse, they didn't seem to be the only couple, because ever since she had snatched one of his hot wings, Uraraka hadn't left Bakugo's side. As a matter of fact, she was fast asleep against his shoulder, and the explosive blonde didn't seem to mind it at all. Figures, the electric blonde thought as he turned his attention back to the stairs. The one girl I actually liked was taken before I even got a chance to get to know her. He sighed and got up from his chair and headed for the door. Kaminari, asked a tired voice behind him, where are you going? He looked behind him and saw Reiko Yanagi of Class 1B looking at him sleepily. He shrugged. Just for a walk, he lied. I wanna get some fresh air. Denki stepped out of the dorm building to the sound of thunder roaring overhead. He paid it no attention even as the air charged the electricity coursing through his body. No, all of his focus was on the girl that had stolen his heart without even trying. And the fact that she had gone upstairs with her boyfriend and had not returned for the rest of the evening. He looked up to where her window was and saw that the room was dark. His head dropped with a sigh. Come on, Denki, he muttered to himself as he started off toward the gates of the dorm complex. It's not like it's any of your business. He clenched his fists and shoved them into his pockets, ignoring the sting of the sparks flying off of them. As he walked, his mind started twisting around his lone training session with the Prowler in the morning. He wasn't sure how he was going to do anything worthwhile. Finding out that he had come dangerously close to killing himself that first time had scared him more than whenever his father had come home after an all-nighter at the local bar. I have to try again, the boy muttered to himself, shaking his head as thunder rumbled overhead again and the first drop of rain hit the top of his head. He sighed and continued walking as the rain started coming down in gentle waves as he passed beyond the dorm gates, and headed for the school. He knew that it could cause trouble for him if one of the teachers caught him, but he still felt the need to get away from the dorms. Getting inside the school, though, was a lot simpler than he had expected. Usually, the school had droids walking around the perimeter as guards, but they seemed to be in short supply while he was basically sneaking into the building. As expected, the school was dead quiet. Even his softest footsteps echoed through the halls like the thunder outside. He looked out a window and saw that the rain was well and truly coming down now, and realized that he was going to have to run back to the dorms when he left. Even then he knew that he was in for a soaking. HMPH, he snorted. maybe this wasn't such a good idea. He sighed and continued walking without much care. As he rounded a corner, a light suddenly shone into his face. "Kaminari," said the familiar voice of the Prowler as the boy shielded his face. "What the devil are you doing here at this hour?" The boy stammered nervously as he shielded his eyes. He lowered his arms and sighed. I needed to clear my head," he muttered lowly as the light descended from his face to the floor. The Prowler came closer, the green eyes of his suit glowing eerily. "You know you're going to get soaked on your way back, right?" he asked as he looked out the window, sheets of rain falling outside of them. He then gave the boy an appraising look. "What made you want to come out in this mess?" Denki sighed and stuffed his hands back into his pockets. "It's complicated." The helmet disengaged, showing that the man's left brow was raised at him in question. "Does this have anything to do with your training tomorrow?" he asked. "Some of it," the boy shrugged. "The rest is growing pains, I guess." The Prowler gave a small sigh. "Kid, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, so humor me," he muttered and crossed his arms. "You've got a thing going for Jiro, don't you?" Denki looked up at him sharply. How did you know?" he asked, feeling worse than ever. The man shook his head. "Seen it a few times already," he explained. "Whenever Izuku and Kyoka's relationship comes up, and things sound like they're progressing in a positive way, you look like someone just spat in your face." He noticed that the boy's face was gaining some color, even in the darkened halls, and tonight you looked like someone just told you that you were terminally ill. Denki bit his lip. I didn't mean to. We seldom mean to do anything, kid," Prowler said as he reached out and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "So, is this what's been holding you back during your training?" The boy sighed and gave a slight nod of his head. "I feel like a total scumbag." "Why?" Prowler asked. "Not like you planned for this to happen, did you?" Denki looked at him. "Of course not," he shook his head. "I mean, when they first walked into class, I was hooked." The boy groaned, sinking to his knees. "So many totally beautiful girls in our class, and I had to go and fall for the one that's not only taken, but also has a kid." He reached up and knotted his fingers into his hair. "And your son is a great guy. I know that, he even tried helping me with my useless quirk, and I still wanted them to break up." Prowler finished for him. "You think you're the only one that's ever thought like that?" Denki shook his head. "Well, no, I'm sure lots of people thought like that more than once," he sighed, letting his hands fall into his lap. "But I couldn't stand it. I can't physically be in the same room with them when they're together, even if they're playing with Eri." His head hung low. "I always put myself where Izuku is, next to her. I can't help thinking about what it would be like to be where he is." And the Prowler urged him on. "What do you think would happen if, by some chance, they did break things off?" Denki raised his head to look at him with frustrated tears in his eyes. "Do you think you could just swoop right in and make her happy?" Denki snorted. "Fat chance of that happening," he muttered. "If those two did break up, I figure they wouldn't stay that way for long." "Why's that?" the man asked, curious of such a thing himself. "Dude, have you seen them together?" Denki asked in disbelief. "They're totally nuts for each other. If they broke things off, they'd still end up together because Eri would bring them back together like a magnet," he said, sounding almost angry. "They love that kid, and she really needs them." The Prowler nodded before he knelt down in front of the boy. "Which means, what?" he prompted, urging the boy to continue. The boy sighed and shook his head. "I need to let it go." He frowned. I don't know how." The Prowler smiled at him. "I can help with that," he said before hoisting the boy up by his shoulders. "Come on, we're heading for the gym." "Now," Denki yelped as he was pulled along. The Prowler laughed. "What better time to unlock your full potential than in a thunderstorm?" Back at the dorms, Izuku bolted up from the bed as thunder roared outside the window, eyes wide with fear as sweat drenched his hair and his face as lightning briefly illuminated the room. He groaned and slowly swung his legs over the side of the bed to sit up, running his hands through his hair tiredly. "That damned dream again," the young man thought as the screams of Kyoka and Eri echoed through his mind like someone running their nails across a chalkboard. I thought that talking to Hound Dog about it would help, but... Izuku. He heard Kyoka mutter sleepily as she sat up, "You okay?" He turned slightly and saw her gathering up the sheets to her chest. He nodded before remembering that she couldn't see in the dark like he could. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said in a hushed tone. "Sorry if I woke you." She scooted closer to him and laid her head against his back. "You know I can tell when you're lying to me, right?" She reminded him softly as she placed her hand on his back where his heart was, feeling it beating faster than the norm. Her fingers spread out across his skin. "Besides that, you're covered in sweat," she told him with worry in her voice. "You were having nightmares, weren't you?" Izuku's shoulders dropped. "How could you tell?" he asked. She gave out a soft, humorless laugh. "You really think that you're the only one that was traumatized when those villains attacked us?" she asked, her arms circling around to his chest as she held him against her. "I have them, too." He looked at her over his shoulder. "Every night. I see you being tortured by that psycho doctor and his monsters." He reached up and took one of her hands, lacing his fingers through hers. "I see you bleeding out in my arms," she muttered, keying his back softly, "and I can't do anything to save you." He raised her hand to his lips. "But you did save me." He keyed the palm of her hand. "You're saving me right now just by being here." He turned around and took her into his arms, her body feeling warm against his own. "I was so relieved that you were safe." He reached up and started petting her hair. "I don't think I'd forgive myself if you'd been hurt." She leaned her head against his chest. "Do you really think that I can forgive myself for what happened to you?" Kyoka asked. "No one should have to go through what you did, and I was forced to watch while it happened." Izuku nodded. "In my nightmares, I have to watch it happening to you and Eri." She looked up at him with horror written across her face. "It may not have happened, but it's still my worst fear." He shivered with disgust. "The two of you getting hurt while I just stand there and watch." Kyoka started to laugh. "Listen to us," she muttered against his chest. "We're each other's kryptonite." "Is that a bad thing?" he asked with a small laugh of his own. "I always thought we made each other stronger." "Yeah, but if one of us gets captured, then we're screwed," she said, giggling louder now. Izuku smiled at her. "Then we just need to make sure we don't get caught," he said before laying them back down onto the bed. She nestled against him, her head against his shoulder as he pulled the covers back over them. She hummed a little as she got comfortable against him. "You know, it feels silly, now that I think about it," she said with small look of embarrassment on her face, "but I'm still a little worried that you'll look at me one of these days, and realize you can find someone better." She muttered, only being partially serious. She felt Izuku shrug. "I feel the same way," he admitted as she gave him a questioning look. "I mean I'm pretty plain looking, but here I am with an amazing girlfriend, and a beautiful daughter." "Aren't you a guy?" she asked playfully before she felt his fingers going for her ribs. "No. No, no, no. Stop." She giggled hysterically before she rolled over on top of him. She reached out and touched his wild hair. "You're lucky I love you so much." He reached out and brought her against his chest. Her left cheek rested against him, letting her hear the steady beat of his heart. Gym Gamma. Denki felt his nervousness return in full force when they entered the gym. The Prowler seriously expected him to push past his limits tonight, when his mind and heart were practically being thrown around in a hurricane. The Prowler turned to him, his helmet disengaging. "I should tell you, Kaminari," the man said seriously, "this is do or die. Either you will move to the next level with your quirk, or I will recommend that you be placed in general studies." Denki flinched. "But I thought you were just going to make us go back to normal classes." But the man just shook his head. "Your quirk is powerful in its own right, kid," he relented with a small sigh, "but you run the risk of becoming completely useless if you use too much power, which means you can't go all out whenever you need to." His face hardened, "Which means that you have no business being in the hero course." Denki frowned, but held a determined look on his face. "All right, tell me what to do." The Prowler nodded. "Good attitude," the man said approvingly. "Charge your quirk up to maximum output, even if your brain shorts out," he ordered the boy. "Push yourself to the point of overload and go beyond it." Denki took a deep breath and let the electricity in his body erupt, his frame becoming enshrouded by a veil of electrical power. The familiar feeling of his voltage limit began to rise. making him feel like the human equivalent of a balloon with too much air being blown into it. He felt ready to pop. "Keep going," the prowler shouted as if reading the boy's mind. "Don't let yourself feel any doubts. Push yourself to the next level." Denki grit his teeth, clenching his fists tightly as he pushed his quirk further. He felt his brain beginning to spark. He was close to overloading. I can't. I can't." "Yes you can," the prowler shouted. "You're almost there." A spark of electricity went off inside his head, causing him immense pain as he cried out and grabbed at his head. "It's killing me." "No, it's not," the prowler shouted again. "Your quirk is meant to help you, Denki, and it is trying to do that right now." The man told the boy as he hit his knees, the impact of his legs hitting the floor setting off a small electromagnetic pulse through the gym that caused the lights to flicker for a moment. "See your quirk for what it really is, Denki." The boy cracked his eyes to look at the man while the storm of electricity raged around him. Spots were dancing in front of his eyes, making it harder to see. "It is a part of your very being, and just like you, it wants to be better, but you have to let it," he instructed the boy, ignoring the sparks that threatened to hit him, any one of them potentially fatal. "Let it show you what you can be." Denki pounded the floor with his fists, setting off more miniature pulses that had the prowler stepping back. His skin crackled with heat from the electricity, and cracks started to form across his body. And then all of the sound and light seemed to vanish, leaving him in a dark place. The electricity was gone. He looked down at his hands and saw no more cracks or scorch marks. His mind was intact, allowing him to think straight instead of bumbling around like he normally would after unleashing so much power. He looked around for the prowler, but found himself alone. He wasn't even in the gym anymore. He stood, looking around. "Where am I?" Denki wondered, his voice bouncing around in an echo. "We're inside our mind," said a voice behind him. Denki whipped around in fright, his fists rising to defend himself, but when he found the one that had spoken up. "It's about time you came here," said a black-haired version of himself. "Do you have any idea how lonely it gets in this place?" demanded the black-haired look-alike. Denki ran a hand through his hair. What are you?" the blonde stammered out. The dark-haired doppelganger just grinned at him. "I'm the other half of our quirk," he then frowned at him, "the part of ourselves that you keep rejecting." "Rejecting?" Denki yelled. "How am I rejecting you? I use my quirk all the time." The grin returned. "You don't even remember, do you?" his look-alike asked, sounding amused. "Think back to when you were a kid," he instructed, "about our dad." Denki frowned at him. I never really knew my dad," the boy said in confusion. "All I know is that he was a drunk that walked out on me and mom when I was just a kid." The doppelganger shook his head. "Bzzt, wrong answer," he grinned. "Our dad didn't walk out on us," the look-alike said. "We killed him." His jaw dropped open. What? That's right," the look-alike smirked. "You don't remember 'cause you blocked the memory away," he told him before he gestured to himself, "and that created me." He smiled at the blonde. "But it ain't like the bastard didn't deserve it," he continued. "Mom never talked about him because he was abusive toward all of us. He beat mom nightly, and kicked us around like an empty beer can." The look-alike sneered. "And finally, we couldn't take it anymore." His sneering turned into a sadistic smile. "When we turned 4, just like every other kid, our quirk came in, and just in time, too." He smiled as Denki shook his head in disbelief. "Dear old daddy was on one of his drunken rampages and was beating and beeping the shit out of our mom while she was screaming for help." The look-alike narrowed his eyes at him. "And we were glad to send that beeper down the Green Mile." Denki shook his head angrily. "I'd never use my quirk to kill." The look-alike sneered at him. "Sorry, princess, but we did," he said, "and guess what? We liked it." "No," Denki shouted but was suddenly pulled forward when the look-alike made a gesture. He had him by the neck in an instant. "Yes." Denki struggled against his grip, but his look-alike was incredibly strong. His grip tightened on his throat. "After that little party, a part of us, you, felt so guilty about what we'd done. You made yourself forget, and locked me away," the dark-haired look-alike said, "and we've been using half of our powers ever since you pushed out on me, the real Denki Kaminari." "I'm the real Denki Kaminari." Denki shouted at his look-alike, electricity sparking across his body. The look-alike smirked at him as blue bolts of electricity sparked around him. Not when I'm through with you. He reared back a fist and punched the blonde in his face, sending him sprawling across the ground. I've been patient, the look-alike said as he stalked forward while Denki staggered to his feet. I've watched while you made a fool out of us. Denki staggered forward and threw a punch at his look-alike, but missed and sent himself stumbling to the ground again. You made us a joke. A kick to his ribs sent him rolling. Denki coughed and hacked as his ribs ached. You even let the woman you wanted be taken by some weak little insect. The look-alike kneeled down next to him, you know. That's the first thing I'm gonna do when I get out of here. Denki looked at the doppelganger's mocking grin. I'm gonna fry that beeping bug, and then I'm gonna beep that girl right in front of him. He began to laugh, rage bubbling up in Denki's chest as his dark half continued to speak, and there's not a thing you can do about it 'cause you're so beeping weak. Denki spat and glared at the look-alike. If I'm so damned weak, he ground out while his dark half frowned, then why haven't you taken over before? When the look-alike remained silent, Denki began to smile. That's it, isn't it? The blonde said, you can't take over because you're not strong enough. Like hell I'm not. The look-alike backhanded him, but Denki noticed that it lacked the power from the previous blows. I'm more than strong enough to get rid of a weak little shit like you. He grasped him around the neck and hoisted him up to his feet. Denki glared at him. Then do it, the blonde dared him, do it right now. Kill me and take over just like you wanted. The look-alike's grip tightened around his neck, meaning to strangle him, but he felt no strength behind it. You can't, can you? Denki smirked, reaching up to grasp his wrists. You're not stronger than me. He squeezed the look-alike's wrists until he pulled them away from his neck. You're not even me, are you? The look-alike's face contorted in rage. You're just part of my fears I keep locked up inside of me. He pushed the look-alike away from him. It staggered back and sent blue lightning at him. Denki caught it in his hands and absorbed it. The look-alike sneered at him. Oh, I'm real all right. I'm as much a part of you as our quirk is. It charged him, lightning enveloping its hands, and when I get out of here. Denki caught the thing's fist in his own. That's the thing, the blonde said, you're not getting out of here. He tightened his grip on the look-alike's fist causing him to groan and hit his knees, and I'm taking my power back. He reared back and struck the look-alike as hard as his electrically charged fists could. And found himself looking up at a white ceiling. He frowned as he lifted a hand to his head, feeling it throb. Where? Suddenly he found Izuku Midoriya looking down at him with a wide grin. Hey, Chio, he's awake. Teach. Denki muttered groggily. He tried to sit up but the man held him down. Easy, kiddo, don't push yourself. Izuku said as Chio came over to them. You gave me a pretty good scare back at the gym. Recovery girl gave him a stern look. I should hope so, the elderly nurse said as she began checking the boy's vitals. From what you told me, this boy's lucky to be alive at all after that explosion. Denki looked at them curiously. Explosion. Izuku frowned. When you were pushing your limits, your body. The man hesitated, then shook his head. Your body burst apart. It did. Denki frowned, looking down at himself, but seeing nothing out of place. Then, shouldn't I be, you know, dead? Chio huffed. Not when you have a form of electrical regeneration like this, she said as stepped back. Your old body couldn't handle the amount of electricity you were producing, so it burst and turned you into pure electrical energy for short time until the regeneration kicked in and reformed your body. She said while the boy sat up, noticing for the first time that he was in a hospital gown. You look the same, but I dare say that your body is capable of much more now that your quirk has awakened. The boy smiled at the teacher. Then I guess I'm still in the hero course, huh? Izuku snorted. If I recommended you to general studies now, Nezu would probably have my head. He smiled. But you did good, kid, really good. He reached out and ruffled his hair. You've earned today off to rest and relax as much as you want. We'll test your abilities tomorrow. If I've cleared him, Chio warned the former mercenary. Izuku relented. If she's cleared you. Denki smiled and looked down at his hands. He started, but frowned as he recalled what happened. What is it? Chio asked. The boy shook his head. Nothing. I just Think I need to talk to my mom. The nurse nodded in understanding. That can be arranged, she said. I'll have Nezu give her a call first thing in the morning so we can have her come meet with you while you rest. She checked her watch, and you really should, dear, it's nearly dawn. Denki looked a little surprised at how long he'd been out, but considering what had happened, he shouldn't have been. He sighed and laid back down on the bed while Chio tucked him in. Hisashi was about to leave before the boy called out, "Hey teach." The man looked at the boy. "Thanks." Hisashi nodded. "Get some rest, kiddo, you're gonna need it," he said as he and Chio left the room, the lights switching off as they left. Denki made himself comfortable as he closed his eyes and was asleep within seconds of doing so. While the boy slept, a spark of blue-colored electricity coiled over his body and sprang into an outlet. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.